Hello, and welcome to another edition of Segue, the show that allows us to talk about issues and ideas here on the campus of Southern Illinois University Edwardsville. I'm Kevin Leonard, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm very pleased to be here today with one of the 10 alumni who will be inducted into the 2022 Alumni Hall of Fame, Terry Ganey. Mr. Ganey is an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. During a 28-year career with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, he received numerous regional reporting awards and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his disclosures of Missouri's Second Injury Fund scandal. Mr. Ganey's 2 nonfiction books have appeared on the New York Times bestsellers list, and he served as the collaborating writer with U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill on her political memoir. Mr. Ganey was a member of the first class of SIUE graduates to earn a bachelor's degree in mass communications. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserves shortly before graduation and was honorably discharged in 1976. In 2003, Mr. Ganey covered U.S. Army operations in Iraq and recounted the chaos that had enveloped Baghdad. He holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. Welcome to Segue, Mr. Ganey.
Kevin, thank you very much. It's exciting to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're with us. Let's begin by having you tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and how did you end up studying mass communications at SIUE?
Well, I grew up in East St. Louis and was drawn to go to school here at Southern Illinois University because of the affordability of higher education here. And I originally planned to be an English instructor, a high school English teacher, but I was drawn to the communications department because it seems like such an exciting way to earn a living if you could get a career in it, and also a kind of job that would change daily. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't fall into a niche or a rut where you were always doing the same thing. Something was always going to be different. And that sort of led to journalism. I worked for the campus newspaper, the Alestle, where I got my first byline. And it was while I was here that I got an opportunity to work at a little radio station in Belleville, Illinois. And my career sort of took a path, marched on from there.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that experience or set of experiences that led you to realize that you could be a journalist. I've heard you say that you were offered a position or you accepted a position while you were a student here at the radio station in Belleville. And how did that lead to other options in journalism?
Well, this little radio station was an AM station, 5,000 watts in Belleville, WIBV, and it had a 3-person full-time news department, something that you don't have hardly anywhere anymore at the local level. Changes in FCC regulations and requirements have basically eliminated news departments at little radio stations, and changes that took place during the Reagan administration that changed the number of radio stations that could be owned by one company. It used to be a person or a company could only own 7 radio stations. That rule got thrown away, and now you have companies that own hundreds of stations, and the programming is all vanilla, sent in by computer, right? It's very sad what's happened to our broadcast bands. But in those days, it was fun to report local news. We read the obituaries. We covered local sports. We covered local news. I used to have to go to the St. Clair County Board of Supervisors meetings in Belleville. I covered city council. We used to have to report in the wintertime, the lakes are safe for skating. We used to get calls. we used to get calls. Are the lakes safe for skating? And we would broadcast that message. Of course, now all of that is available on the internet, right? That whole world has kind of changed. But gradually over time, I realized the stories I wanted to tell needed more space than 30 seconds on a radio news broadcast. So I went into print journalism where you could write longer, tell things in more in depth. And while doing that, I also decided here's a bigger story that I could turn into a book. And that's why I wrote a couple of books, nonfiction, along the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds really fascinating. Were there specific individuals, faculty members, or other students who inspired you during your time at SIUE?
Yes, the department director, Dr. John Ryder, became the department director in 1968, which would be the year after I first started here. And he recruited Camille Winter, who was a Czechoslovakian broadcaster who became a refugee when the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. He was very inspiring. We had some adjunct instructors who were real on-the-street reporters who told us about skills we would need on the job. One name that comes to mind was Harry Thiel, who was a Wood River Journal reporter. Spencer Allen, KMOX Television in St. Louis, was also one of those who taught us broadcast news. Mm-hmm. And all of them were very inspiring to us, as well as the faculty advisor to the Alestal, a man named Ed Hassey.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like you got some great experiences here, and that allowed you to make the transition from radio broadcasting into print journalism.
Right. All kinds of chances to write for the Alestal, different stories, sports stories. I was the sports editor for one semester. Gave me the opportunity to dip my toe into different venues.
Okay. Well, I'm certain that our listeners would like to know more about the books you've published. So your first book was originally published under the title St. Joseph's Children, A True Story of Terror and Justice. Tell us more about that book.
Well, as a reporter for the Post-Dispatch in Jefferson City, there was an innocent man freed from the Missouri State Penitentiary where he had been sentenced to serve a life sentence for a child's murder in St. Joseph, Missouri. And it turns out he was innocent of the crime. Later, the actual murderer confessed to it. He was a serial killer. And when I covered the release of this innocent man, Melvin Reynolds was his name, and began to dig deeper into the story, I realized if ever there was an opportunity to write a nonfiction true crime book, here were the facts laid out for me. So it was that entree into writing books that presented itself with Melvin Reynolds' release from prison. I covered the release and all of the facts behind that case for the newspaper, but then realized I can take this story and expand on it, going to the cities where this serial killer had committed other crimes, San Francisco, Bettendorf, Iowa, other places across the country, and it would become book-size story. And so that's how that book came about.
Oh, okay. So it started from your reporting for the Post-Dispatch.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But then you realized that there was a much larger story to tell.
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that sounds fascinating. And that actually did make the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, what happened was it came out under the title St. Joseph's Children. I selected that title because two of the victims were from St. Joseph, Missouri. They were both children. You know, when you think about, well, who was St. Joseph's Children? Who was his child? I thought it was a interesting way of naming a book. That was my point. When St. Martin's Press bought the rights to the book for paperback, they changed the title to Innocent Blood. So it was as that paperback, Innocent Blood, that made the New York Times bestseller list, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And you also published an unauthorized story of the Anheuser-Busch dynasty. Tell us more about that.
Well, that was a remarkable book, a remarkable story about a remarkable American family. The Bush saga begins in the mid-1800s when Adolphus Busch comes from Germany to St. Louis to make his fortune. he already came from a family that had a fortune in Germany, right? But the brewery liked to make it out to be he was this poor immigrant who came to St. Louis to found a brewery. And so Adolphus marries the daughter of Eberhard Anheuser. Eberhard already had a beer company and a beer brewery, but the beer wasn't very good. And Adolphus marries into the family, and his value was not as a brewer, but more as a salesman. And he had a knack for boosting the reputation of his product, getting people to buy it, and getting others to be distributors for it. And he kind of stumbled across his fortune when he partnered up with a man named Conrad, who had his own brand of beer called Budweiser. And Conrad ran into financial troubles. Adolphus got control of the name Budweiser and used that beer to grow his company. So over the years, all the generations of the family, Adolphus's son, August A. Bush, his son was August A. Bush Jr., better known as Gussie, who is kind of the flamboyant St. Louis Cardinals owner. All of these people were figures larger than life. And myself, a reporter at the Post-Dispatch, we knew all these stories about the family. It was a logical story to write for mass consumption, right? Mm-hmm. So there were some impediments. They didn't want a book done. They even notified everybody in their company and all their relatives, don't cooperate with these two authors. And in that sense, we had obstacles facing us. Mm-hmm. But sometimes people, Kevin, when they get a order, don't cooperate with somebody, suddenly people want to cooperate, right?
Yes.
You might get a call from somebody who didn't even know you because somebody doesn't want you to talk to this person. So we were able to talk to enough people and get enough documents to put together this saga of the family that at one time controlled the largest beer brewing company in the world. And that was the story of Anheuser-Busch.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds really fascinating. I wanted to talk about something I mentioned in the introduction. You served in the U.S. Army Reserve, and then you had the opportunity to go cover the U.S. Army operations in Iraq in 2003. Tell us something about what that was like to cover that war.
Yeah, I look upon that Iraq war as a big bait and switch operation. H.L. Mencken said that if you are a real journalist, you've covered three things in your lifetime. One would be a revolution, the other would be an execution, and the other would be a national political convention. And I had covered a national political convention. I had covered an execution in Missouri, but I never covered a revolution. But I thought that a war is pretty close to that. And so in 2003, when the United States was going to war in Iraq, they offered an opportunity for journalists to be embedded with military forces. Mm-hmm. I entered into the running to get selected for that role and managed to get a slot with a combat engineering company from a battalion from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, the 5th Engineers. It's a well-known in Army circles unit, the 5th Engineers. And I was going to it thinking this is going to be high adventure, right? I've never done this before. There might be some danger to it, but I think it would be manageable. And so off we went, and I thought, and as many people did then, that it was the right thing to do because somewhere there were weapons of mass destruction to be found. But once we got there, and once a lot of chaos developed over our arrival there, it turns out there were no weapons of mass destruction. And the reason for being there really didn't exist the way it was explained to us to start with. And the holy grail of finding the weapons evaporated, and suddenly you wonder, well, why are we here? So in that sense, it was an interesting experience, but it lacked validity. And you kind of felt like you were part of a hoax. I'll be very frank with you. You were just part of something that wasn't really true.
Mm. Now, did the unit you were embedded with share those feelings? Was that something that was widespread?
Keep in mind that when we're there, at the time we're there, we still think that there are weapons of mass destruction there.
Okay.
The idea that the intelligence was incorrect or maybe purposely misrepresented was not known at the time.
Okay.
The Army soldiers, God love them, are doing their job and just trying to make sure everybody stays as safe as possible.
Right.
So they're hoping that they have a real reason for being there. Why put your life on the line otherwise? But they didn't really know at the time that it was not the way it was put up to be. It was only later that we found that out.
Okay.
Even if they did have doubts about what they were doing, they weren't going to tell me about them.
Okay.
Because, he's a journalist. He's going to tell everybody. We're going to keep our thoughts to ourselves. So in that sense, while we were there to report on, witness, and report on what they were doing, we could see their actions, quote them, but what's really going on in their heads, for the most part, stayed there.
Okay.
It was a fascinating experience, but it didn't turn out the way I thought it would.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes. But it sounds like a really remarkable experience to be with the troops as they're really searching for weapons of mass destruction, and also, part of the argument was that we were liberating, the U.S. troops were liberating the people of Iraq as well.
I think that side of it, for some people, was correct. One of the things that I came away with, Kevin, was the idea that you go into a place thinking that you know how it's going to work, but some people are one type of the Muslim religion and others were not. You had the Sunni and the Shia, and these factions were quietly at war with each other, like the Protestants and the Catholics in Northern Ireland, and I could not tell a Shia from a Sunni, and I'm sure that many American soldiers did not, and they went there for the right reasons, and they were trying to do good, but the situation on the ground was much more complicated than they could have realized. Yeah. So they're not trained to deal with these nuances of religious differences.
Right.
They're trying to bring order to a people that have had some disorder all over some ancient tribal argument that you have no clue about.
No, that sounds really, really fascinating, and thank you for sharing that with us. So to shift gears a little bit, what was it like to work with Senator Claire McCaskill on her memoir?
Well, Claire McCaskill is, I covered politics in Missouri for 3 decades. Democrat, Republican, man, woman. She was by far the smartest and most eloquent, glib, quick for a quote politician I ever witnessed. And all along, her personality attracted people people came to realize that she is a bright political star in Missouri. Of course, now we see her on MSNBC. She's constantly on the cable networks talking politics, right? I knew her as a state representative, then as a prosecutor, then as a U.S. Senate candidate. And nobody is as savvy and as quick-witted that I've ever come across. And I would mention to her, Claire, you ought to write a book. Oh, I don't know about writing books. And these comments of mine eventually produced the book that she wrote. It's called Plenty Ladylike. And I basically was the wordsmith on her book. She would tell stories, and I would transcribe them, and we get the text together, and Simon & Schuster published it. And she was the one who helped the Republicans nominate her opponent in one of her Senate elections. Todd Akin was the most radically right candidate among Republicans running the year she was running for U.S. Senate. And she purposely helped Todd Akin win that nomination. And then as her general election opponent, Akin stumbled in some remark he made, and she was able to cruise on to victory in the U.S. Senate in Missouri at a time when probably any other candidate would have kept her from staying in the Senate. And of course, 6 years later, along came Josh Hawley with Donald Trump's tremendous backing, and between those two, Trump made 5 or 6 visits to Missouri on Hawley's behalf. That was the end of Claire McCaskill's political career as in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah. Well,
but she was fun to work with. She had amazing stories to tell. Not all of them made it in the book. But she, and you can see it in her TV persona. She is very popular with viewers. She has a big following on Twitter. And she's, if Claire has a fault, it's sometimes saying everything on her mind, not holding anything back. And sometimes that got her in trouble.
I do appreciate. I do hear her on occasion on MSNBC, and I do appreciate her insights.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So it's good to have more of a sense of what she's like from somebody who worked closely with her.
She's a very genuine person.
Yeah.
She is what you see is what you get. She's very genuine and honest, and what I found, too, about her, Kevin, was that she was fearless in going into areas of Missouri where she was not wanted. She would hold town hall meetings with crowds that were not going to be in her favor, but she took on their questions and put up with them. You don't see any politician doing that now.
Yeah. So how did your SIUE education prepare you for your career?
Well, it gave me basic skills. I learned how to work with people in a collaborative way through group projects here in the communications school. It helped me write simple sentences when I worked at the Alestal, sentences in the active voice, things that could be done quickly. You learned speed was important when you'd write stories. I think it gave me a well-rounded education. I think that it's not a selective school, right? So you're going to meet people from various backgrounds that you might not meet in other schools. So in that sense, it was good grounding for what I did in the future. And I feel very lucky to have been able to go here. It's amazing how you can make a simple decision that didn't take much time in your life, but it sets you off on a path. I just said, I think I'll go to SIU Edwardsville, without a lot of thought about it. I can afford that. I could work part-time. I always had a part-time job while I went to school here. So that when you make that decision, you don't realize, well, that's going to put you on a path that's going to lead to something 50 years later.
Yeah. No, and we're very proud of your achievements, and I'm wondering if to sort of build on that a little bit. Do you think that what you learned from your experiences at SIUE prepared you for the radical changes in the field of journalism over the course of your career?
I don't know that you can predict the future in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell this little story that you decide to do things when you're in college or not to do things thinking that it's always going to be like this. You don't need to learn this because you're never going to need that in your life. I'll give you an example. The AP style, the Associated Press style of writing news, they were teaching that here, and I said to myself, well, I'm going to be a radio journalist. I'm always going to be reading my copy. I don't need to learn the AP style, right? And so I sort of blew that off. I blew off that requirement in journalism school. About 3 years later, after I've graduated, I'm at this radio station, and where am I applying for a job? The Associated Press in St. Louis. And one of the first things they do is, okay, you have to take a style book test. And okay, well, let me take it tomorrow, right? So I can study up. Is submachine gun hyphenated? How do you spell certain words? Where do you capitalize? All of those things are taught in that book. Mm-hmm. And I was studying that because my life depended on it at that point. So if I would say anything to somebody going to school now, learn as much as you can about as many different things as you can, because you're never going to know that you're going to need it.
I think that's great advice, and actually that I actually did have a desire to pursue journalism. I edited my high school newspaper. I edited a college newspaper, and then I had an internship with the newspaper when I was in college. But then I decided not to go in that direction. But the people I talked to always said exactly the same thing: is study as broadly as possible, and don't focus too narrowly in what you're studying. So I think that's great advice. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think media literacy is more important now than perhaps ever before?
Well, it used to be we had places where you could go for information that were highly reliable. Mm-hmm. You knew that Walter Cronkite was going to tell you the truth, and you relied on Howard K. Smith. I'm talking about television broadcasters nationally of years ago. You had the AP and UPI to stick to facts, and newspapers that, for the most part, stuck to the facts and told you what was going on. The opinion pages might diverge, but for the most part, everybody was working from the same set of real information. Now, because of the fragmentary nature of where we get our news, or what passes for news on the internet or on cable TV, you have to be very careful about what you're believing or what you're relying on for your opinions, because you can't be sure that there is a secret agenda behind what information is being imparted to you. And that's where media literacy comes in. Have the facts being presented to you been verified? Who are the sources? Is the person who's bringing this to your attention perhaps have some conflict? There's a hidden agenda, an axe to grind. And that's why media literacy, I think it should be taught in high schools, that everybody needs to know that what you decide to work with in a democracy has to be true. And we have had a president who has condemned the journalists who were reporting truth as enemies of the people. So media literacy and the ability to know that these facts are what is really true, and that's what we're going to base our decisions on, is probably the most important element of democracy.
Well, I very much appreciate that. And I agree wholeheartedly with you. One of the things I'm very interested in is trying to increase media literacy and digital literacy in many areas of the college curriculum right now. So, well, thank you very much for spending some time. I've really enjoyed talking with you today. So thank you, Terry Ganey, for talking with us about your experiences, both during your time at SIUE and as well throughout your career. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us. Stay safe and take care.